First,
yes, I would ask you to speak as loudly as you can, but I can't hear you.
Okay. You're going to be sworn in here, Doug.
Would you please spell your name?
My first name is Douglas, D-O-U-G-L-A-S. Last name Wolfberg, W-O-L-F-B-E-R-G.
Okay, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Proceed.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes. Faintly.
Should I stand by the phone?
it might be better if you did. Do it.
If I stand here, can you hear me better?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay. For the record, would you please state your name?
Douglas Wolfberg.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a consultant and attorney.
And what type of consulting do you do?
Emergency medical services, consulting and compliance work.
Could you give us a little background on your qualifications to do consulting on this type of work?
Sure. I originally became an emergency medical technician in 1981, and for most of the next 15 years worked in the field as an emergency medical service provider. Then, after graduating from college at Penn State with a bachelor's in health administration, worked as a county EMS director in Pennsylvania, and also then as a director of a 3-county regional EMS system. Then as an administrator for the statewide EMS council here in Pennsylvania, and then finally worked as a EMS consultant for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And then after that position, I enrolled in law school, finished my law degree in 1996, and for most of the time since then, except for a few years when I was practicing at another firm, I have been a principal in the firm of Page, Wolfberg, and Worth, whose practice is focused solely on ambulance and emergency medical service issues.
Were you contacted by the city of Clinton to assist them in a case involving ambulance billing records?
Yes.
How did you get contacted?
I was originally approached by a member of that department, who then put me in touch with counsel for the city, Mr. Walker, and then the first substantive contact I had about the case was through Mike Walker.
And who had originally contacted you?
I don't remember exactly, but one of the members of the department approached me at a conference last year after the case, I think, had been filed, and I was speaking at a conference in Iowa, and someone came up to me, it might have been Andy McGovern, I'm not 100% certain, and mentioned the case and said if I was interested in assisting, they would have Mike Walker contact me. I said, sure, have him call me, and then the next contact I had was from Mike Walker.
And when you mentioned the case, is that the Schulteis versus City of Clinton case?
Yes.
What did you do? I assume Mike Walker called you.
Yes.
And what did he ask you to do?
Well, he asked us to review the pleadings. So the case file was sent to me, including the pleadings and just related court documents, which there was not much. It wasn't too voluminous in the way of pleading. And then he asked me to review records, ambulance records, and insurance records that were at issue in the case, to give my opinion about whether or not I thought the city had a defensible position in the Schulteis litigation.
And what did you review then specifically?
Well, I was sent over a period of some weeks. I was sent a few different CDs that had been prepared by Mr. Walker's office, and those CDs contained files of both patient care reports, which are the ambulance run charts, and some insurance documentation that's generated after the claim is submitted and paid. Documents like EOBs, which is explanation of benefits, or remittance notice. Documents that come from the insurance companies that say what was paid or not paid, how much was paid. So the CDs contain a mixture of ambulance patient care reports as well as insurance records.
And what specifically were you looking for in reviewing these documents?
Well, I was primarily looking to see if the documentation supported the level of service that was being billed on the insurance claims. That, you know, the Schulteis complaint was a federal False Claims Act case. So obviously, the central question in the case was, were the claims that were submitted on behalf of the city, were they justified? Did the documentation, primarily the ambulance call reports, support the services that they were billing for? And my job, I was asked to look at that documentation to see if the charts consistently supported what was being billed.
And what did you find when you reviewed these records?
Well, shortly into my review, I found something that was unusual. And what that was that as I began to review the charts and correlate the documents to a summary that had been prepared by Mr. Walker's office, that summary I was really using as a roadmap to try to just help me locate on which disk and in which file the documents were. So I was just using it to, you know, this document is in this file and that document is in another file. So using it to make sure I had all the documents in front of me. And I was retrieving them all from the right place. When I started to do that, I found that the calls that I was looking at had two different patient care reports for each call. And at first I thought maybe that was an anomaly, so I reviewed a few more claims and found out that that was consistently coming up, that there were two different versions of those patient care reports for the calls that I was looking at. And that was an unusual finding, and that was the very first thing that jumped out at me. And frankly, I didn't get much deeper in my review once that initial problem cropped up.
What did the differences in the patient care reports or the duplication? What did that indicate to you?
Well, it indicated to me that the patient care reports had been changed, and there, you know, the versions of those patient care reports were different. So at some point along the line, you know, somebody had to change some of what was contained on those charts to produce the two different versions I was seeing.
Do you recall what would have been changed?
I'm sorry?
Do you recall what things you saw that had been changed?
The primary areas of change on the forms that I looked at seem to center around the nature of the dispatch information, the documentation of how the call was dispatched by the 911 center seemed to be the areas where most of the changes were made.
And what were the discrepancies that you saw?
One version of the chart generally seemed to have a condition that was stated more seriously than the other version of the chart. To give one example, one version of the chart might say that the dispatched condition of the patient was sick person or weakness, and the second version of that same patient care report might say chest pain or shortness of breath, both which would be treated more seriously than the other conditions that were reported.
Now, you do this on a regular basis. You review records.
Yes.
And do you see this often?
No.
How often have you seen it?
I would say rarely. I would say, you know, if I do, you know, if I look at, if I work with, you know, 30 clients in the course of a year doing chart reviews, I may see this once a year, once every 2 years.
After discovering this, you said you didn't get very far into it. How far did you get into it?
Well, I looked at about 60 charts from the CDs that I was given, just to rule out that this was some kind of anomaly or that it was just bad luck of the draw. The first few charts I looked at happened to have different versions of the charts, and sometimes there are explainable reasons for that, and I wanted to just make sure that this wasn't an anomaly. And I wanted to look at enough charts to tell me whether this was an anomaly or whether it was a pattern. And I was satisfied that it was a pattern and not an anomaly. So my next move was then to contact Mike Walker and share with him those findings.
And how were you satisfied that this was a pattern and not an anomaly?
If it was an anomaly, I'd only expect to see it on a few charts, a handful of charts if that. Every chart I pulled up randomly had, two different versions of the patient care report. So that would be more than just chance. That would lead you to that kind of finding. When selecting the claims randomly, if it was an anomaly, you wouldn't expect to see the same pattern come up in every randomly selected chart.
And did this come up in all 60?
I can't say all, but I would say the overwhelming majority.
How do you define overwhelming majority?
It would be 90%.
After talking to Mike Walker, what did you do next?
Well, when I told Mike that I was concerned that the two different versions of the patient care reports existed, and that one version stated the dispatch condition more seriously than the other version, I expressed my concern that was potentially consistent with the theory of liability raised in the Schultheis complaint. In other words, so far, I can't offer a defense because the documentation seems to be consistent with the complaint. Now, because there can be other legitimate explanations for why you might see this, it's unusual, but I certainly did not want to discount the possibility that there were legitimate explanations for it. So I expressed my concern to Mike Walker, and he asked me to contact Andy McGovern at the Clinton Fire Department.
And did you contact Andy?
I did.
And was he able to offer an explanation?
He offered, the first explanation he offered was that he told me that recently the department had upgraded its software to be what's called NEMSIS compliant. And we talked a little bit about that. And I'm familiar with NEMSIS. I've done some work for the NEMSIS organization, actually. It's a standard that's been developed by the federal government. And
I'm not familiar with NEMSIS. Tell me what that's about.
Sure, yeah. NEMSIS is the National EMS Information System, and it was a system put together under a contract with the federal government with an agency called NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And what NEMSIS was a standardized data set to try to uniformly collect and report pre-hospital data, so that you could make meaningful comparisons of data between counties, states, geographic areas, but the data would all mean the same thing, because each state and locality collects data their own way. NEMSIS is a project by the federal government to standardize EMS data collection. And in fact, me personally and our firm were engaged by NEMSIS to advise them. So the reason I tell you that is just to tell you that I'm familiar with NEMSIS, and when that was offered as a potential reason why there might be different versions of the chart, I was a little skeptical, and I questioned Andy a little bit further, Mr. McGovern, about that a little bit further, just because it didn't strike me as something that would cause two different versions of the same chart to appear.
Why do you say that?
Well, I say that because NEMSIS is merely a data set. It can't change the value that you would see in a given field. One analogy, and I don't mean to speak beyond my expertise, I'm not a computer expert, but I guess one analogy that I could give was that if Microsoft upgraded the version of Excel spreadsheet that you use on your computer, and you opened a file that you created on the old version of Excel, it wouldn't change the values that you put into the database to begin with. It would merely change the operation of the software. And what I was seeing on the versions of the patient care reports were wholly different software does not on its own accord change a condition from weakness to shortness of breath. Nemsys does not do that. That's not how Nemsys operates. The software would not go in and change the values that were entered into the database to begin with.
And when you say the value, is that a code you're talking about?
No, the value just means what somebody put into the box. What somebody wrote, shortness of breath, or chest pain, or weakness. Software would not go in and reassign the input or the contents of that field because it thinks it knows a better term. Software upgrading to be Nemsys